Hello and welcome to my presentation about constraints as part of the software development process. My name is Mr. Omar, I'm a teacher at Geelong High School, and this is mainly intended for my VCE computing students. So here is our learning intention, that you can explain what constraints are and the 5 categories. Now that's actually a typo, it should be 4 categories of constraints, and that you'll take part in discussions, ask questions, answer questions, and amend your copy of these notes. So let's see what constraints are first of all. Constraints are limitations, much like the speed limit where we have to, that's the fastest we can go. A constraint is a limitation on what we can do in this project and what the product itself can do. So as I just said, it is a limit on what the development team can do. So there are some constraints there, and there are also constraints on what the system itself can do. And they are broken down into 4 categories. Now, if you're coming back to this as revision or you've been studying VCE computing already, then let's see if you know all 4 categories. So I should know this given that I put this presentation together just a few hours ago. So there's economic, which is essentially time and money. There is social, which is the capabilities of the users. There is technical in terms of what our computing environment is, and finally there is legal in terms of, I guess legal and ethical, in terms of what laws and social expectations that we have to fit within. So let's see if I got them. Economic, yes, technical, social and legal. Well, let's have a look at them one by one. So, the sort of shortest version of this is that time and money are the same thing in terms of constraints. So, you'd have a budget limitation. So, you know that famously in Australia, the Weather Bureau cost, I want to say $80 or $90 million and was meant to cost 10. You know, you're spending real money when you're doing software development, so you're going to have a certain amount of money that you can work with, or you might have a certain amount of time that you can work with. With your SAP project later in the year, you're mostly going to be limited by your time, but also, if you had more money, you could spend money on things to help you with your process. Like, money does pave the way to do other things, and the fact that you haven't got a monetary budget is in itself a limitation. Your available human resources. Who have you got? How much of their time have you got? And what skills of theirs can you put into motion? Do you have the relevant expertise? Because you might not always. I mentioned before the development time. How many hours in the day? How many days in the week? How many weeks before you have to get this thing finished? You're going to have a limitation in terms of your hardware and software infrastructure costs. What's it going to cost you to set up the servers? You might already have the devices, but that in itself is a limitation. You have to work within what that device can do, and that's a limitation both in terms of how powerful it is, what software it's running, licensing expenses. Probably not going to be a factor in your SAT, but in lots of commercial enterprises you are licensing software that your software is going to be interacting with, and that can be very expensive. Which is in itself a budget limitation, but a particular type of budget limitation. And finally, the maintenance and support costs. What's it going to cost to keep this thing ticking over? So, our technical constraints. Now we can see the little penguin at the bottom of the screen, so if I were in class I'd be asking people to suggest what they thought technical constraints they could think of, but let's have a look. So, hardware capabilities. What can the hardware you've got do? What can the software that you've got do? You know, if you have to build it in, say, PHP and JavaScript, what can you do within the bounds of that? What are your performance requirements? You know, how fast does it have to be? What are the security specifications? You know, being secure or insecure isn't Boolean. It's not you're either secure or you're not. It's always somewhere on a scale, and different projects will have different requirements and different constraints. If you're developing it in a highly secure environment, you know, a military environment for instance, then you're going to be constrained by extremely specific and very thorough security specifications. What are the limitations on the platform that you've got? And what systems do you need to integrate with? These are all things that constrain you or limit what you can do. They're all technical constraints. Oh, and of course this one probably should have been further up the list. How much memory and processing power have you got to work with? On 42 Penguins, which is the site where my wiki is over here, I actually pay by how much memory and processing power I have. So if I want it to be able to serve more users more quickly, that actually costs me more money. So that is a technical constraint on me. You have to, again, all things, you have to balance them out, what you want versus what you can afford. Oh, and of course, bandwidth constraints. Just how much data are you needing to push through the pipe? So, social constraints, I think I've actually misunderstood this in the past, and I think that perhaps other people misunderstand it too. Social constraints are not like ethical norms. Social constraints are for, well, who are we designing it for? Not everybody is the same in terms of their expertise. So the solution will have different groups of users. If you're building something to be used by teachers or students or old people or young people or people who are, very heavily into particular interests, they're going to have different sets of skills. And you can't just say, oh, I'll make it great for everybody. Because there is no design that is just perfect for everybody. You've got to trade it off. And so you do have these profiles of users that you build up and say, this is our target user, this is what we expect that they're like. Because different users will have very technologically diverse backgrounds. It's a common trope, I guess, that people my age don't understand technology and that people under 20 are just natively good at all technologies. But I wouldn't like to bet my development money on that being true. I'd want to back that up with some data. So this is somewhere where we'd probably be collecting information as part of our data collection stage to inform this. And you've just got different levels of expertise. You've got novice to expert levels and intermediate in between. Now, and design must balance complexity with usability. You see those insides cockpits of planes, and there are hundreds of switches. Obviously they're necessary, but even in that situation, you do have to acknowledge that you can't just make it endlessly complex. These are people who have to use it after all, even highly trained people. So, our last one is legal constraints. We have the constraints of the rules of intellectual property, of data ownership that we need to be aware of, and of data privacy. And I would put to you, what is the legislation in the study design or in Victoria that we would need to be aware of here? So, the big three, which I hope have come to mind, is the Copyright Act of 1968, the Privacy Act of 1998, and in Victoria, the Data and Privacy Protection Act of 2014. So those would be probably the big ones, but there are other ones in the study design. If we go over to the wiki and look at legislation, there we go. And in actual fact, there we go, we have the Copyright Act, the Privacy Act, the Privacy and Data Protection. We also have a couple of amendments to the Privacy Act in 2012 and 2017, and the Health Records Act. So all of those are things that you would need to be aware of in terms of your legal constraints. Okay, let's have a quick look at our understanding and see if we can categorise these constraints into those four groups. So the application must use this encryption for all data at rest to comply with the National Data Protection Standards. So that is a legal constraint. So it has to comply with the National Data Protection Standards. You might look at it first and think, oh, that's a technical constraint. It's certainly a requirement. It'd be a non-functional requirement, but it's simply saying, okay, we're constrained by these laws. The total budget and cloud hosting and third-party API subscriptions cannot exceed $500 per month. That is an economic constraint. The user interface must be fully compatible with screen readers and haptic feedback users for users with visual impairments. That's a social constraint. That's to accommodate our users. The system must be able to process and store high-definition video uploads without crashing the central server. I would say that's a technical constraint. And we've got four more before we finish this presentation. All user data must be stored on servers physically located within the country's borders due to prior privacy sovereignty laws. Well, that's a legal constraint. That's the laws that we've got to comply with. The project must be completed and launched using only the existing internal staff, and there is no funding for external contractors. Well, that's economic. That's about the resources that we have available in terms of time and money. The app must support 12 different languages to ensure all ethnic demographics in the city can use the service. So that might be a legal constraint, but I don't think it is in Australia, but it is most certainly a social constraint. It is about what are our users like. And finally, the software must integrate seamlessly with the city's 30-year-old legacy database system using a custom-built bridge. Well, that's a technical constraint. So I hope you found this presentation useful. There is more information on the wiki, which is at 42penguins/wiki. I hope this has been useful to you.